So I was all prepared with all my own questions, and then I go and I check Kimberly's Twitter, and she says, here are some of the things I'd like to address, and I think we're going to get right into it. Judging from the reaction, most people here seem to know Black Girls Code, yeah? All right, okay. Let's just skip it backward. Let's go right into it. All right.
All right.
The pipeline.
Yes.
That was the first one.
Yes.
You think that's still a good way of looking at the sort of problems in the tech industry?
Well, we had a very, I guess I would classify it as robust conversation at dinner last night about this concept of pipeline, and is it a pipeline issue or is it not? And lots of folks in the room said, oh, no, it's not a pipeline issue. That's hogwash. That's not what the issue is. But when you look at the numbers, I think it's clear that you look at the number of women that are graduating with CS degrees, or the number of women of color, or just the number of kids in general, we're not meeting demand. So if it's going to be 1.4 million jobs in the next 10 years, we can only fill a third of them. That's a pipeline issue. But I think the term has been held hostage by companies that don't want to face the realities of the lack of diversity in their companies. And I think we need to call it that. And I think the issue that has been kind of utilized under this term of pipeline is really about the current work pool, the current available workforce. And the issue is that that is not representative of the demographics in the U.S. And, you know, the issue is not pipeline in that respect. It's why are you not hiring these people that are available? What criteria are you using that blocks them from access? And I think that's what we need to push in the conversation with the tech companies. Yeah.
So when it's used as an excuse, it sucks. But as a way of thinking about what needs to happen in the future, it lays out some steps.
Right, because I made a comment, and it wasn't a joke to a friend of mine on Twitter who said, yes, I'm a part of the pipeline, but this is a mature person who's in their 30s. And I was like, oh, no, you're not a pipeline. You're much too old for that. Pipeline is the girls that are 10, 12, 13, 17 that have not even had their first job. That's what I think of when I think of pipeline, not a person that's a mature employee that has experience and background. They should be getting access to these jobs, and they are not. And that's different. Yeah.
So the other topic, or one of the other topics you want to talk about, was the difference between equity and inclusion.
Yes.
So why are we talking about that?
Why are you just going to jump right in, huh?
Yeah, we're just...
Well, I think it's been interesting since we started Black Girls Code back in 2011 to see the conversation transform over the last 6 years. So in the beginning, no one was talking about diversity. It was the elephant in the room that no one wanted to acknowledge. And we started with the numbers that came out from Google and then Pinterest and others that started to have this conversation around diversity, or the lack thereof, in the industry. I think over the last couple of years, the conversation has started to turn to inclusion, meaning it's not just enough to focus on the numbers. The people that come into your organization need to be included in terms of advancement opportunities, included in terms of having access to even the very first interviews. But I think it's more than that, in terms of really focusing on, does that get them equity? So how many companies are being funded and created by women or founders of color that enough VC supporting that? Are they focusing on that? The numbers and research lately shows that they're not, that they really could care less. But that doesn't breed equity. So it's not just enough for girls that are coming through Black Girls Code to have access to work at Google, even though Google, I love you. Thank you for supporting this conference. I want them to create a Google, right? And so that's a different conversation. That gets into equity and talking about access to power in ways that is transformative for communities. And we're not there yet.
Let's talk about funding your organization.
Yes.
How's that changed through time? Because it started 6 years ago now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I assume it's gotten a little easier to raise funds at this point. Where are you in that? Like, are you able to get traditional, all the kinds of funding that you want? Or
absolutely, it's much easier than in the beginning. So I talk a lot as I have these interviews about In the beginning, no one would give us money because they did not like that we called our organization Black Girls Code. So we had a fundamental backlash from funders even, because we
They were like, people of color code? What about that?
Yeah, they seriously, they would say, well, can you call it something different? And we were like, no, we cannot call it something. Well, if you follow me on Twitter, like I'm very for, right? I'm like, no, we cannot. Because this is a term that we chose because it's empowering. It's not something that's meant to exclude. It's meant to make sure our girls feel included. And I think with the work that we start to do in the community, and as people start to see that we're actually very inclusive of girls that come into our space, but we're still focusing on this demographic, things start to change. And then when the numbers were released in about 2013, things really started to change, because then people were like, yes, we need your help, we need your pipeline of girls, and things really turned around for the organization. I think, you know, on this term of equity, though, I find that we are still at a point where founders of color, in nonprofit and for-profit, however, do not get equitable access to support or funding. So if you recall, I'm sure everyone has saw this thing that happened with Black Girls Code in the news and a major company here in the Bay Area, not to be named, where we turned down some funding. Part of the reason,
name them, can't we? No.
I just prefer not to give them that.
Okay, fair enough.
But everybody knows who it is. But the thing was that, you know, I felt that it sent a message, a very clear message about who gets funded at what rate and how much, and how they perceive the importance of the work that we were doing. And I think that is something that is echoed also on the for-profit side, when founders of color, you know, struggle to raise even $500,000, and, you know, white male startup entrepreneurs can write an idea on a napkin and raise 1.5. And I think that is really what we are focusing on in terms of making sure that our work is valued, and is valued at the same level as others that are doing in the work in the field. And I think that's a conversation that the philanthropy segment really needs to address. And how are they supporting nonprofit founders of color that are from the community, we're of the community, we came right from the same places that these girls and communities we support are from, but we're not getting the same access to capital to do this work as our peers.
Who are the foundations or the companies that, you know, as you've talked to a bunch of them through time, seem like they're doing the right things, or at least they're kind of on the path, and people can sort of look to their techniques to get better?
Well, I always say some of the usual suspects that we hear and a lot about. You know, Google was our very first partner that gave us some money when I just had an idea. So there was one of those occasions where I had an idea for where I wanted to see the organization grow, and they funded that, and they've been a supportive partner for us for the whole past 6 years. Our New York office is in their building. So even though as a company they get a lot of backlash about the culture and the dynamics within, I've seen them make really tangible steps to drive the conversation, right, around inclusivity. And I think that a lot of companies don't do that. They actually put some money in the pot to drive this work. I like what I'm seeing also with Intel. I mean, it's, you know, it remains to be seen if they're going to achieve the results that they want, but they actually put a number on the line. And I think that's something that a lot of companies are very reticent to do. They don't want to put a number out there, but oh, they want to change diversity, but they don't want to name a number. And what you don't measure does not happen. And I think until we see more companies that actually put something on the line and set a target, we won't start to see change. And then I would say, last but not least, Pinterest is a company that I have followed. And I like to name Pinterest because they have built in this issue of diversity and inclusion into their culture from the very beginning. And I believe wholeheartedly that, you know, it's very difficult to move a large organization like a Google. But if you start at the beginning, as a company, as a startup, and you build this focus and this perspective on diversity and inclusion from the very first day, it's much easier to achieve. And I think that Pinterest is a company that has really modeled that as a startup to where they are now, and I continue to see them move the needle forward.
Yeah. So what about, you have now 7 workshops. You got 2 offices, and then you've got
14 chapters, not
14 chapters.
Yeah.
Sorry, 14 chapters.
14 chapters.
14 chapters in different places.
Yes.
What do you see that's different, here in the Bay versus these other places?
Well, I feel that in the Bay Area, one of the things and the reason that we started here, if I had not been in the Bay Area, I'm not sure I would have founded Black Girls Code. Because it's this concept where tech is so endemic to everything that permeates the Bay Area. And I think that was one of the most surprising and shocking things when I started Black Girls Code as well, that tech was so embedded in the fiber, that makes up the Bay Area, and people of color and women were absent from that. It's like, how could we not be in that conversation? But we weren't. And I think that being a part of that fabric allows us to kind of shape this notion of what tech can become. As we were talking backstage, one of the reasons we are in Oakland, that's where our headquarters is, even though we started in San Fran, is because we feel that's the genesis of what the tech industry could be. If they were building in a community that really focused on social justice, which really focused on inclusion, which really focused on activism and tech for good, that's where it would be. It would probably be in Silicon Valley, but it would be in Oakland. And so I think really bringing the organization up in that kind of community, it creates a different atmosphere for our girls to really feel empowered and to feel connected to their roots, so to speak.
And they're going to the hub. They're seeing all these people who are trying to develop companies like right in the community. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Oakland is such a vibrant place in that way, in that space in particular.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it speaks to what's missing for me and many others like me in Silicon Valley, in this whole tech industry, is that there's such a lack of connection to the community at times. And it's odd because we're the ones that are buying these products, but yet we're not at the table of creation, right? And so I think that is the way the industry can really have the impact that we say that we do. Like we say we're changing the world, but we're really not. If you've never been to East Oakland, you're not changing the world. You're creating an app that is targeted for very, very small demographic. Of those programmers that are sitting in your company, you're not changing anything. So I think that Oakland and other cities like it, Atlanta, other cities like it, Detroit, have a really prominent role to play in where we want to see the industry become in the future.
Yeah. So you've had 6 years now of girls go through the program. What do you see as the success factors for them, and how many of them are sort of staying on the track, sort of going into these careers and staying in the pipeline?
So this was the first year that we really saw a large cohort of girls that really graduated from high school and started to go into college. My daughter included, who graduated from high school and still on the path to going into computer science, being a game developer. One of my students, Rebecca, who's at Cal State East Bay, she's majoring in game development. She's the only, I think that's a shame, but anyway, that's like she's the only woman of color in her freshman class. But like I'm like, really, Cal State East Bay, you need to do better. But we're starting to see our girls go into that pathway. And so that's really what we wanted to do. Like, we really do believe the college pathway is important for girls that are coming through our program, because it's not just about coding. It's also about creating these leaders that are going to sit at the tables that making many decisions, not just in tech, but in other places. I think one thing that was missing, or one thing that just kind of spurred my attention in the conversation, a panel that was just here, was that there's a lot of talk about, yes, we want to create these changes, and colleges are doing so much great work around getting women. And Harvey Mudd, I love the work that they have done, but I've been very forthright with Dr. Clave that, like, this is great that we have changed the dynamics around women, but you haven't had the same success with students of color. So I think it's time to move the conversation. It can't be just gender focused, right? It has to be an intersectional conversation. And we have to understand not only how do we get more women into this pathway, but how do we get more women of color? How do we address issues that are unique to students of color that are not solve by looking only through a gender lens. And I would like for more VCs like the one that was on the stage to have that understanding that we may move the needle an inch by only focusing on gender, but we need a more holistic approach to diversity and inclusion and equity to really change how our industry is in the future to meet the needs of the world, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see Black Girls Code in 5 years or stretching out into the future?
I really see Black Girls Code as an organization, especially now that our girls are starting to age out of our program. I'm really seeing us building these direct connections both to universities and to employers that can start to engage moving this real pipeline into seats within the technology industry. So a big focus of our work in 2018 will be creating those partnerships. So one of the things that worries me is that we have this really vibrant and supportive community within Black Girls Code, but what happens when a girl leaves? Like, is there a safety net in terms of where she goes next? We want to be able to facilitate that and to be able to partner with both the universities and corporate partners to create the net that ensures they not only get in the game, that they stay in. So I want to see us moving in that direction and actually putting our students into positions. And I want to also see us expand beyond the U.S. I think here in the U.S. we focus so much on our issues, and Lord knows we got a lot right now. And yeah, that's all I'll say about that. But there's a world beyond that. So I think there's so much of the same struggle that I see with girls of color in South Africa as I see in East Oakland. I see the same struggles with girls that are in Malaysia. I see the same struggles with girls in Canada, this lack of access to opportunities to become the creators. So I want to see our organization really lead that pathway in creating these both connections and opportunities for girls across the world and not just in the United States.
Let's get one question.
I'm Tyne Johnson. I run the Black Bay Area, and basically we're kind of like an online social media community of Black people who kind of take frames of Black excellence in the Bay Area. We reshare stories. We reshared your story with, well, I don't know if you could say it. I could say it. Reshare the story with Uber when they said they weren't going to take the money. I said it. She didn't say it. But also just generally, we're trying to develop an online ticketing system for Black events in the Bay. I was just wondering, because you said something that was really key, was one that you're taking a holistic approach, because there is a lot of trauma going on in Oakland, particularly with a lot of displacement due to tech and due to people like living under the freeway. I'm from the Bay, and so I've never seen that amount of people living underneath one freeway. And so just with that, taking a holistic approach, but also a nuance to, I want to work for Black people. I want to have a database of Black people, Black content that's localized. How did you go about verbalizing that it was important to serve this type of audience? Because a lot of investors look at it as a niche audience, and I feel like I'm not a niche. This is my real life. Like, I can't like just go somewhere and not be Black. Like, and also we tend to, as a people, put our dollars where our mouths are at. We're spending a lot of capital. We're spending a lot of money on product. We're investing in tech because we're daily consumers and users of tech. So I just want to have that integrated piece within my local community.
Well, for Black Girls Code, we've always thought of ourselves as a grassroots organization because we started out grassroots in Bayview, Hunters Point. Like, we were literally right in the community center, right in the basement. We went door to door of all the schools in our neighborhood. That's how we started, and we never lost that. So I think the point is to build by centering the community that we serve, because it's key. I think a lot of the organizations that I see, even working in our K-12 space, they build without asking parents, is this what you want? And I often wonder, how do you do that? Because I have mothers that when we're in Atlanta that live in the projects behind Spelman coming into our workshop crying because they want a better opportunity for their kids. So how can you build something that's meant to help this demographic of students, but you don't talk to the parents about what they want? So I think as we build businesses, is understanding that we can be successful by centering our people in the narrative and making sure that they stay connected all the way through. And we're really meeting their needs in a very real and direct way. I hope that answered your question. You're welcome.
That is all the time we have. Kimberly,
Right.
thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.